Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Jeremy Corbyn lurches from one crisis to another, and the latest, of course, is unfolding against a backdrop of a potentially bloody war in which the British seem increasingly poised to get involved. I was trying this morning, I was going to try this morning to do the two topics separately, to do an hour on Jeremy Corbyn and then an hour on Syria, but as I just drew breath before talking to you 30 seconds ago, I sort of realised that's probably not going to be possible. So just stick with me this morning. We'll work our way through both issues, but I don't know how separate we will be able to, or indeed would want to keep them. Let's start with what Jeremy Corbyn is doing wrong. By which I don't mean, do you agree with him about airstrikes, OK? We will get onto that, and I will at least attempt at the outset to keep the two just slightly distinct. What I mean is, as leader of the Labour Party, what is the leadership crisis that he is currently creating? I don't think anyone could deny that there is a leadership crisis, although I have to tell you that criticising Jeremy Corbyn has now reached UKIP levels of delusion and absurdity from people who refuse to let anybody criticise them. The kind of criticism and the kind of comments you get when you suggest that Jeremy Corbyn might not be the Messiah after all are now reaching the sort of levels you get from UKIP supporters who are similarly married to the idea that speaking your mind is absolutely wonderful unless you don't like what you're hearing, in which case these people should be silenced forever. 5 minutes after 10 is the time. The phone lines are open. Here's his problem. He is facing mass resignations from his shadow cabinet, the majority of whom apparently want to back David Cameron's support of Syrian airstrikes. Shadow ministers have accused him of being fundamentally dishonest and treating them with contempt after he wrote, in a way over their heads to MPs, saying that he could not support airstrikes. This despite telling his shadow cabinet on Monday that they would reach a collective decision on Monday. And there is, I think, the beginning of our conversation today. There seems to be, and I've got nothing pithy to say on this. I think that's an illustration of how confusing everything is this morning at the moment. I think things that were strengths on the backbenches are incredible weaknesses on the front bench. I stress again, the phone lines are open. Jump in whenever you want this morning. 0345 6060 973. However confused and fearful we may be, talking always helps. That's why I've got the privilege of doing this every day. Talking always helps, even if you don't provide clarity or answers. Just getting it out there, having conversations is always healthy. I think things that were strengths on the backbenches, a sort of contrary approach, almost a politics defined by rejection. I don't think rejectionism is a word, but it probably should be. It's very clear to identify, and there are parallels with UKIP here as well, it's very clear to identify what Corbyn is opposed to, what he is against. Increasingly difficult to work out precisely what it is he is for. In the context of Syria, for example, everybody's top priority should be to end the killing of civilians, to end the killing of the innocent. The point is that the innocent are currently being killed on an epic scale, and it may well be that a Western-led bombing campaign would reduce in the long term the death of civilians. We'll get onto that later this morning. We're talking for now about Corbyn. He is the leader of the opposition, OK? These words are important. The leader of the opposition. And he is getting absolutely crucified by his own MPs and most of the media for leading opposition. And I've got to tell you, while I remain supremely unimpressed by the man on so many levels, I'm confused by that. He is the leader of the opposition, and he is being routinely lampooned, criticised and metaphorically crucified for, think about it, leading opposition to the government's policy on Syrian airstrikes, leading opposition to Syrian airstrikes, leading opposition. What's the leader of the opposition done wrong today? Oh, he's led the opposition to the government. You see what I mean? And then you wonder whether you're going mad. You wonder whether the lenses you have to look at the world through are now so distorting that you can't see the wood for the trees. Because, of course, he is opposing, but he's not leading. You still with me at the back? He is opposing the government. He is opposing the airstrikes. He is categorical in his inability to support them. But he's not leading the Labour Party. And that's why what was a strength on the backbenches, a voice in the darkness urging caution, a voice in the darkness urging reason, a voice in the darkness urging perhaps a little more thought, an alternative attitude, stop the war. Very healthy, very valuable, very important on the backbenches. The job of the leader is to lead. Who's he leading? Who is Jeremy Corbyn leading when he calls for, or when he reveals his inability to support Syrian airstrikes? Who is he leading? Going right back now to A-level politics, this thing called collective cabinet responsibility, which I don't think as a phenomenon really applies to the opposition quite as strictly as it used to apply to government. But the idea is if you cannot speak as one, you have to leave. If there's a majority of shadow cabinet ministers in favour of supporting the government's policy on Syria, Jeremy Corbyn has to resign. He can't swim alone. This, to me, is amateurish to the point of dangerous. Collective cabinet responsibility means that you find a line on which you can all agree. The Labour Party is led by one man, but it's also led by its front bench. It's a collective, if you will. And you'd have thought Corbyn, with his history of rejecting whips and rebelling and voting against the party line, you'd have thought Corbyn had offered them a free vote before he'd even had breakfast. Apparently not. He is not leading anything. He is conducting himself entirely as if he was still a thorn in the side of the party machine, speaking from the bearded backbenches. And you might admire that. And I guess that is what appeals to this legion of younger, not always younger, but this legion of converts, this legion of evangelists, this legion of Labourite crusaders who see him as offering access to a brave new dawn. I get that. Okay, that's fantastic. But he's not leading the Labour Party. And if he's not leading the Labour Party, guess what? Nobody is. That's terrifying. We've got a government that's undertaking, even with the U-turn on tax credit cuts, there's still an ideological battle going on about how much protection and security the average citizen should be able to expect from the state. Huge battle going on. And the Labour Party is effectively leaderless. Because if he's leading something, it sure ain't the Labour Party. What's going on? I know that's a slightly shallow question, but it's actually a really important one. I give you my analysis. My analysis is this. He is a backbencher with a history of rebellion who has altered his behaviour and attitudes not one jot, despite now being leader of Her Majesty's opposition. And that means he's not a leader at all. What should he do? Because there is that voice in the back of my head at the same time saying, how can the leader of the opposition get a kicking for leading opposition? And there's the point, isn't it? That's why it's helpful sometimes to examine the semantics of this. He is not the leader of opposition. He's the leader of the opposition. He seems to have forgotten the existence of that definite article. Backbench rebels are leaders of opposition. Opposition to everything. Opposition to their own party. Opposition to history. Opposition to the theory of whatever it may be. Opposition to the government, whoever it is, even if it's your own fella in charge. Opposition. But to lead the opposition, it seems to me, is a rather subtler task. Let's start with that then. What do you think of Corbyn's conduct? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. And also examine my statement, which you could probably and will probably explode in a matter of moments, but my simple statement that he is not leading the Labour Party. He is not leading the Labour Party. He has failed utterly to recognise that leading the Labour Party means a compromise, even an abandonment of personal positions in pursuit of strength and unity. 0345 6060 973. I am supremely unimpressed by Jeremy Corbyn, OK? However, I simultaneously hold cold fear about what Ian Duncan Smith and George Osborne are doing to this country. Genuine fear. And guess what, you weirdy-beardy Corbynistas? You can do both. You can absolutely despise some elements of the government's policies and ideologies while simultaneously finding Jeremy Corbyn something of a muppet. It doesn't mean you have to go and join the Conservative Party if you think Jeremy Corbyn is increasingly clownish in his conduct. You wake up to that, and there might be a party left for somebody someday to lead. Ian's in Welling. Ian, what would you like to say?
Good morning. I think your statement was the interesting word for me in your statement is leading.
Yes, exactly that.
What I think Jeremy Corbyn has done quite successfully is rally people to a cause. So this is, I think, is why all the, as you call them, the Corbynistas and some of my erstwhile friends on Facebook get so excited whenever Jeremy Corbyn sort of sneezes or manages to walk in a straight line. But what he's doing is he's rallying people to this cause that he has, some of which I think is entirely legitimate. I don't disagree with everything he thinks either.
Nor do I, for heaven's sake. But it is a cause of rejectionism. It's a cause of opposition rather than the opposition.
But what this is a symptom of, I think, is something that I think is a bigger problem in politics, which is that so many people go into politics and spend their lives in there without having ever actually run anything or done anything. One of the things that I've learned over the years of both working for very good managers and then eventually becoming, one myself and running a business is that what you realise is that the people who work for you, or in political terms, the people with whom you work, have an independent voice. They have their own ideas. The more you learn, the more you realise you don't know anything. And actually, what you do is you try and gather around yourself the best people you possibly can, give them the framework, and then let them do a good job.
Ken Livingstone, John McDonnell.
Well, yes, but what Jeremy Corbyn is doing is gathering people around him who think the same as he does.
Yes, exactly right.
And therefore he's rallying, he's not leading. So what he doesn't do is to take all those people who don't agree with him, the Yvette Coopers and the Andy Burnhams, who, while I think they can be a little bit... They didn't show themselves to their best under Ed Miliband's leadership, let's say, did at least understand the idea that if you disagree with each other in private, that's fine, but when you go out into public, you must sing from the same hymn sheet. Jeremy Corbyn seems to be saying, this is my cause, this is where my flag is placed, you can join me or you can reject me. And what's happening is, of course, that they're rejecting him very publicly, in front of his face, in Parliament, and undermining him utterly. And that's just simply a failure of leadership and a failure to understand how organisations work and how people work. It's terrible.
It's brilliantly put. It's a failure of leadership. It's not a failure of principle or conscience or integrity or politics. It's a failure, an epic failure of leadership. As if, as one of my tweeters has already said, Jason, it's as if the bloke on the terrace that's always shouting about how bad the manager is actually gets offered the job.
Yeah, well, wouldn't that be fun? I mean, the thing is, you could almost certainly pick anybody from the backbenches, put them in the leadership of a party, and watch it go wrong. I mean, I think Tim Fallon, for example, is a good example of
we'll see
of a barrel being scraped. But and I'm sure you could find Conservatives who are equally useless. And I seem to remember
there's a Secretary of State for Work and Pensions had a crack. I think he proved your point perfectly, didn't he?
Well, he did. At least Ian Duncan Smith did understand how to lead and manage people. The fact that he wasn't very good is another thing. But you could pick any backbencher and put them in charge of something and watch them do a bad job. Unfortunately, what's happened with Jeremy Corbyn is that he's so wrapped up in his own idea of being against things. I mean,
This is where and we're late for the travel, Ian. I just a testament to how compelling I found your contribution that I hadn't glanced at the clock for a few minutes. But rejectionism, that's it. That's what I'm gonna. That's the word we're coining today, until people can dissuade us from that position. Corbyn is just the high priest of rejectionism, and leading the opposition needs a hell of a lot more than that. Go on, 0345 6060 973. Tell me what I'm missing.
James O'Brien, weekdays 10 till 1 on LBC.
22 minutes after 10. So I was listening yesterday to coverage of Jeremy Corbyn's shadow cabinet snub in a way. They had agreed collectively, or they'd agreed together that they'd reach a collective decision. This was agreed on Monday. And yesterday, after David Cameron's Syria statement, he sent a letter directly to Labour MPs revealing that he would be unable to support Syrian airstrikes. So he has completely disregarded the Shadow Cabinet's wishes, the Shadow Cabinet's desires, many of whom are in favour of airstrikes, all of whom would have liked to reach a decision that could be collectively defended. Historically, if he was anything other than leader, he'd have to resign over this. So that was my first thought. My second thought was, hang on a minute, why are we giving the leader of the opposition a kicking for leading opposition? And I sort of found myself thinking there's a really, really subtle but absolutely crucial distinction between opposition and the opposition. And it's a distinction that Jeremy Corbyn, for all his decades in the Commons, seems to have completely missed. Leading opposition is not the same as leading the opposition. There are constitutional, political and parliamentarian aspects to leading the opposition. You can't just stand up and shout, no, down with war. Not when you're leader, can you? Lisa's in Cricklewood. Lisa, what would you like to say?
Hello. I'd like to say I completely disagree with your analysis.
That's very healthy. Thank God you're still allowed to say that out loud.
Yeah. I mean, Corbyn was elected purely on his principles. So he is a breath of fresh air in the Labour Party. And if Parliament had in the past had voted with Corbyn, we wouldn't be in the mess that we're in now. If we listened to people like Corbyn in the past. And if he did anything other than what he's doing, he'd be, the membership would be completely dismayed.
Well, I don't know that you're disagreeing with my analysis. Absolutely he's keeping the membership happy, but he's not leading the opposition in any way whatsoever.
But you mean the parliamentary party? You're talking about he's not leading the parliamentary party.
I mean the people who would form a Labour government, yes.
Well, I think, unfortunately, the parliamentary party is still full of a lot of people that are from the past, are Blairite, were put there by Blair, and don't really represent.
Well, hang on,
you
can't condemn the past while praising Jeremy Corbyn, who largely still lives there.
Well, that's a bit cheap, isn't it?
No, it isn't. You're the one saying there's a lot of people there from the past, and you said in the same breath we should have been doing what Jeremy Corbyn wanted for the last several decades.
So he doesn't want to knee-jerk bomb. Why isn't the scrutiny on Cameron?
No, I know his views, Lisa. I know his views. I'm talking today about his failure to lead the Labour Party, which is not open to criticism. He's not leading the Labour Party. If you remember the shadow cabinet, your leader said to you on Monday, right, I'm not comfortable with this bombing, but I appreciate the demands of collective cabinet responsibility. I have a long history of rebelling and rejecting the party line, so I know how important it is to get the party line right before we can go to the people and ask them to defend it. And you walk out of that meeting thinking, God, he's absolutely right. Of course we have to get the party line right. And then he sends a letter over your heads to every member of Parliament saying, look, I told the shadow cabinet on Monday we were going to come up with a collective decision, but there's no earthly way I'll ever be able to back this. How is that leadership? It's the polar opposite of leadership.
No, it's not. I disagree. No,
okay, tell me why you disagree. Tell me how you'd feel if you were in that shadow cabinet.
Well, I think it would be pretty obvious that he couldn't vote for it.
So they should have realised they were being lied to.
They weren't being lied to.
We will reach a collective position.
So how do we know everything you've just said is true? That all these...
wow, we're going full McCarthyism now, are we?
No, not all. I don't...
Okay, find me anyone from Jeremy Corbyn down, find me anyone that denies that's what he said, because you can't.
Well, all I know is that there's no scrutiny on Cameron. Cameron must be laughing.
See, we're doing it now. There goes the spotlight. Away from Corbyn's utter failure to lead, let's start talking about David Cameron instead.
Cameron is the one who's talking about taking us into bombs.
I know what David Cameron's position is. I know what David Cameron's position is. I know that his party largely supports him, and I know that his cabinet understand what collective cabinet responsibility means.
Completely support him. Cameron's party doesn't completely support him.
No, not completely, but they have support from within their party. You know what the party line is. What do you think the majority of Labour MPs would do under a free vote?
I don't know.
And you say there's no crisis of leadership. 26 minutes after 10. Brendan is in Winchmore Hill. Brendan, what would you like to say?
Well, you're comparing Jeremy Corbyn with David Cameron.
No, I'm not. The last caller did. I'm asking what Jeremy Corbyn is doing that could be loosely described as leading.
Well, yeah, that implies Cameron is giving good leadership and Corbyn...
No, I promise you it doesn't. I've got huge problems with David Cameron. I'm utterly unpersuaded by the need to bomb Syria at this point in this way, but I want you to tell me how Jeremy Corbyn is leading anything or anyone anywhere.
Well, fundamentally, he has said he does not believe bombing Syria is the right thing to do at the moment, and that's not dramatic. The way Cameron's speech is dramatic, and he's not coming up with any solid alternative. But if you look at what Cameron proposes...
I don't want to talk about David Cameron, Brendan, because we're talking about a crisis of leadership at the top of the Labour Party. We'll talk in the next hour about Syria specifically, but you need to tell me, just like the last woman couldn't, you need to tell me what Jeremy Corbyn is doing that even looks remotely like leadership of the opposition party.
You can't divorce it from issues, James.
I can and I have. Just describe to me anything that looks like leadership in his conduct this week.
Well, if you look at the recent thing with tax credits, it's reasonable to say that's a victory for Jeremy Corbyn.
Which was cheered to the rafters by Tory backbenchers. Who do you think exerted the most pressure on George Osborne, them or Jeremy Corbyn?
Well, you look at the issues that
Mate, I feel your pain, Brendan, and I don't want to prolong it. I don't want to be responsible for increasing it. I feel your pain. I'd love to drink the Kool-Aid and see a man that could lead the country. He couldn't lead his way out of a wet paper bag, Brendan, and the sooner everybody else wakes up to that, the sooner they can get down to the business of opposing the Tory government properly.
Okay, well...
Have a great weekend. It's 29 minutes after 10. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I mean that passionately. Whatever your politics are, a strong opposition is absolutely essential to a healthy democracy. And at the moment, we do not have an opposition in any meaningful political sense. It breaks my heart. Not cheering from the rafters or anything like that. Some people will be. But it is absolutely obvious that we do not have a cohesive party of opposition. And the reason for that is the leadership. And the leadership is absent. And what the answer or the solution is, I do not know. But if a majority of the cabinet wants to support Syrian airstrikes, then any member of the cabinet that can't go along with that has to walk the plank, even if he is the leader. Here's the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell MP, on Twitter at 10:05 this morning. Can everyone calm down on Syria? We're all simply working through the issues and coming to a final decision. Don't mistake democracy for division. And here's Jeremy Corbyn writing to Labour MPs after David Cameron's statement on Syria yesterday. He will not be able to back the bombing under any circumstances. So you can understand the frustration that those of us on the sidelines feel, and we're almost all on the sidelines now. Also, please don't make the mistake of thinking that Labour MPs are put in position by members of the Labour Party. Labour MPs are put in position by voters. Those voters are free to vote for whoever they want. They could vote for the BNP if they wanted. They could vote for UKIP. They could vote for the Conservatives. They could vote for the Liberal Democrats, the Greens, the monster raving loonies. Yes, Jeremy Corbyn's seen a surge in Labour Party membership. That's got absolutely nothing to do with winning elections. So, where is the leadership? 0345 6060 973. And I think this is evidence that he can't be leader, isn't it? Because he is not a man who is going to do deals or compromises. He's not a man who ever sees the possibility that he might be wrong. I admire that in a backbencher. It has a hugely important role in British politics. Opposition is essential, but the opposition is different. Sam's in Stoke-on-Trent. Sam, what do you want to say?
Basically, I think what this shows is the process of the Labour Party's gone awry. The basic leadership election was open to the public. An MP selection, they parachuted in from the Labour Party. Take my area, Stoke-on-Trent. Tristram Hunt could not be more alien to the people of Stoke-on-Trent than a Martian.
But he won.
That's exactly what's the problem.
But he won.
Yeah, but he was the only Labour there. He was the only MP available. So people who always voted Labour vote Labour. They should open up the selection of the local MP to the local Labour Party, and you might get a bit more reflective. All the MPs are all Londonistas, all singing from the same shinty bed. You know what I mean? Basically.
Listen, I don't mean this as an insult, I promise you, but you sound very UKIP when you say stuff like that.
I just think, well, I mean, look at Tristram Hunt. I mean, he knows nothing about...
What's wrong with him?
He's not from the area. He doesn't know anything about the area. He's from London Century. That's the problem. Whereas the leadership was open to the public. I know he jumped in there, but he was open to the public, and the public spoke. And I don't agree with Jeremy Corbyn. I think he is making a bit of a hash of it, but I think it's a symptom of what the selection's gone wrong.
So you feel disconnected from politics in general, but from Labour politics in particular?
I'm very into it, but I think that they've got too far from listening to the people to just leading, to just telling us what we should think, and just, they've gone, it's both, isn't it? You should lead and listen, and that's where it's all gone wrong for the Labour Party, because the MPs don't reflect. I mean, hardly any of them have had a job or done anything. You know what I mean? It needs to be a meritocracy. That's what we need a bit more of. Some people have had a real life, and maybe we get a bit of consensus then. But what's happened is you've got a guy who just, like you say, objects to everything. MPs that don't really reflect the people they're supposed to reflect. And therein lies the problem. I mean, I think we should... Syria, I agree in a way, because bombing won't sort it out. We need to sort out the enemy within first, and then I'm afraid it's going to be a combination of bombing and boots on the ground.
Right, we're getting onto that later. Just in terms of leadership, does Jeremy Corbyn strike you as a man who can provide any?
No, not. I would vote Labour, but I do like when he asks questions for the public and Prime Minister PMQ.
You see, again, that's evidence of an absence of leadership. I quite like a bit of it, and indeed, I was very proud on the first day when one of our regular callers, Marie from Putney, provided him with one of his first questions. It was a wonderful moment. But in terms of leadership, if we were thinking of going to war, much as I love Marie from Putney, I'm not sure I want Jeremy Corbyn to be giving her a ring before he made a decision.
Not something as serious as that, no. But I mean, it is different. He is trying, but I think
it'd be different if he dressed up as Ronald McDonald to do PMQs.
Yeah,
wouldn't mean it was better.
And yourself were great. It just seems to be what was it? Rejecting.
Rejectionism, mate. Copyright James O'Brien. See, start spreading the word in Stoke for me, Sam. Seriously, this is the era of rejectionism. You can see the parallels between Corbyn and Farage. They just reject stuff without ever telling us what they actually stand for. Nimrod's in Billericay. Nimrod, what would you like to say?
Hello, Jim. Oh, a little nervous suddenly.
Don't be. I'm a little bit excitable today because I'm scared, but I'll calm down, I promise.
Well, a little bit about Jeremy Corbyn's leadership, as it were. If to put it in a very simple way, the majority of Labour voters, I would say the majority of English people, but that I can't back that up.
Sure.
The majority of Labour voters at the moment will probably not vote for to bomb Syria, even though
it's 59% on the last opinion poll. I know that's far from scientific or reliable, but I'd say it was probably rising daily after Paris.
Amongst Labour voters?
No, amongst the whole country.
No, I'm in Labour voters.
Okay.
Therefore, by sticking to his principle, like the lady tried to say before, Jeremy Corbyn perhaps doesn't lead the parliamentary opposition machine, but he does stand for the majority of the Labour voters as an elected Labour leader.
You think?
The majority,
and you might be right, but I can't let you leave that as a bold statement.
Well, somebody has to be a leader. That's what the majority of.
But he's not leading the Labour Party.
He's leading the Labour voters, not the Labour.
He's not leading the Labour voters. He's leading the membership, if you will, the vocal membership who think everything he does at the moment is magnificent, and that's great. But he's not leading anybody else.
He is. He's leading the Labour voters, and I understand that there's a question here about. I'm not sure about the term representation, how the politics in England falls. The way that we vote. I voted for Labour. I'm not supporting of my local MP, but I voted for Labour because I'm on the left, as it were. The majority of people who voted for Labour and on the left all don't want to bomb Syria, but they are not represented by the likes of Andy Burnham.
I'm glad that you've managed to keep a calmer head than me, because this is a crucial observation that you make, Nimrod. It is, of course, the case that Jeremy Corbyn at the moment is leading opposition to bombing Syria, and that should be a rather wonderful thing, given that nobody opposed the Iraq war in a position you had to resign if you wanted to oppose it.
That would have been my next question. We went to the Iraq against the majority of the English people, of the English public.
But again, I can't let you leave that as a bold statement. We didn't. So there might have been 1 million people marching up and down the country, but there was a majority support in all the opinion polls for going after Saddam Hussein. Admittedly, because we'd been lied to, but still the support was there. I need to clarify something as well. I did Jeremy Corbyn. He's getting enough of a kicking from the biased media. I don't want to join in from the perspective of the unbiased. He hasn't said that there are no circumstances in which he would support the Syrian bombing. It's important to clarify this because we'll move on to Syria specifically in the next hour. He has said that he doesn't believe the Prime Minister made a convincing case yesterday to extend the bombing to Syria. The crucial test that he has put in place is the question of whether or not it strengthens or undermines our national security. There's a New Statesman journalist, one of the younger generation of journalists who I read with a mixture of envy and wonder, called Stephen Bush, who's just been tweeting this morning on a point that hadn't occurred to us. Well, it's probably occurred to you, but it hadn't occurred to me, so I apologise. A very simple question of the priority. It's not just national security, of course, but if you put the other top priority in place, you want to stop innocent people dying. And the knee-jerk response to that is to say, well, you're not going to do that by dropping more bombs. But odd though it sounds, you might. See, innocent people are dying now on an epic scale. 400,000 Syrian civilians dead since the civil war started. It is the strangest thing to grasp, and it's very difficult for people who abhor violence and war and dream of peace to grasp. But actually, in the great scheme of things, over a 10-year window, it could well be the case that you would cause fewer deaths of innocent people by stopping the situation that is currently unfolding using violence. Weird though that sounds, there's a logic to it. David's in Ascot. David, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, David.
What I want to talk about, I'll just clarify this, is not really the issue as such, so I don't basically agree with Corbyn on this. I'd be quite liking there to be some sort of military action on ISIS.
Next hour, sure.
What I'm questioning is your theory about leadership being very poor. So I do accept the point that actually in parliamentary terms there is something about collective cabinet responsibility and so on, which is being damaged here.
Yes.
But in terms of pure leadership style, one of the things that I do in my for a living is teach leadership. And I make the point...
Those who can do, those who can't teach.
So there were, maybe, yeah.
Just a little tease, David.
Lots of different styles.
So those who can't do either, blather on the radio about it for 3 hours every day.
No, I'm not going to do that. I want to get finished in half a minute. There are lots of different styles. So some people are very military precise sort of thing and they make the right decisions. Some people are a bit more magic and they get kind of people thinking that there's some spiritual connection or whatever with what they're doing, even if their product is just something very basic. Some people are all about like healing and bridge building and making it all work and so on, etc., etc. So I'm not going to go into that in too much detail. But I do think that Corbyn is doing something sensible, even though I'm in a different political party.
We're a little late for the travel, and I get your analysis of leadership. Who is he leading?
Okay.
Who is he leading?
He is leading his party, but the thing is that they need to accept his leadership. It's a covenant. It's an agreement between people to be led. It's not just something where he could push them around and make them do.
If a majority of the shadow cabinet wants to support the bombing campaign, right or wrong, if the majority of the shadow cabinet wants to do it and the leader doesn't...
The key thing about democracy, it is not just majority rule. It is also accepting minorities, even if one of those is your leader. That has to be able to happen. Otherwise, we are all in big trouble, in my view.
It is leadership of sorts under David's analysis, a very good analysis, but it's not leadership of the Parliamentary Labour Party. And quite what point is being missed by people who say, oh, well, he's representing the members. You will never govern again. That's fine if you can live with that. You will never govern again if this man stays in charge. You know, is it the Rosetta Stone that you have to use to understand Egyptian hieroglyphics? Is that what it is? Have I got that right? I think I have. Anyway, if I haven't, imagine there was this thing, right, that you use to understand Egyptian hieroglyphics. I'll call it the Rosetta Stone for the sake of argument. I want a Rosetta Stone for the Labour Party at the moment. I want to just find the translation tool that would help me understand, not necessarily approve or disapprove, but clearly understand what is going on. It seems astonishing to me that the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, can apparently want a free vote on the issue of supporting the Syrian bombing campaign, while Jeremy Corbyn, a man elected on the back of a lifetime of rejecting party lines, defying whips, voting against his own leadership, he reportedly wants Labour to be unequivocal in its opposition to war, a position that will leave more than half of the shadow cabinet howling at the moon. It's just, and I know the closest we've got to a Rosetta Stone is he represents the membership, not the Parliamentary Labour Party. But the membership don't win elections. The Parliamentary Labour Party does. They're the ones out knocking on doors, putting leaflets through letterboxes. I know members do that as well. But in terms of who ends up in Parliament, surely the people who've made that journey are more important than the people who haven't, in terms of wanting to govern the country. And if you don't want to govern the country, that's fine. More power to Mr. Corbyn. If you do, how can the utter absence of leadership currently being displayed at the top of the Labour Party leave you anything but bereft? And I ask that question with a sense of desperation as well. I can take the kickings for why don't you sod off and join the Tories, all that sort of thing. That's fine. But in terms of what it is you're seeing that I'm not, I'd pay good money for a glimpse. Callum's in Harrow. Callum, what would you like to say?
Hello, James.
Hello, mate.
I think it's partly to do with the deep crisis within the Labour Party at the moment. If you look at it, it's trying to get a collective view amongst a party that has deep divisions. One side is essentially neoliberals, and the other side, which Corbyn represents, is unconstructed Marxists. How are you supposed to align?
He's not an unreconstructed Marxist. He doesn't believe in handing over the ownership of the means of production to the people. He might have some Marxist ideologies, but the more complicated the language you use, the more unhelpful it is if you're not painstakingly accurate. So tell me what you mean by neoliberal as well.
I think when I say neoliberal, I mean people that believe in free market neoliberal economics. If you look at Corbyn, that is not his view.
That's true, but he's not an unreconstructed Marxist. And most of the Labour Party would be comfortable with some renationalisation and some redistribution of wealth, so they're not neoliberals either. So the language is unhelpful.
Okay, well, let's get away from the language. My point is, I think the main issue is that he appointed a backbench which are opposed to some of his key issues.
Sorry to split hairs, but you mean a front bench?
Sorry, a front bench. At the front bench, yes. And I just think that it was his main problem, leadership, in appointing those people in the first place, because it was inevitable that a vote on war was going to happen. And I think he should have essentially brought people in that are more aligned to him. Whether there were enough people in the party to do that, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think he probably thought he had, didn't he? He put Maria Eagle in charge of defence. He put John McDonnell in charge of the Chancellorship. But there is not the strength in depth. You'd need to have some of his former leadership rivals. You have to have some people who've got a legacy back to when Labour was in power. Or maybe you don't. Maybe he should have. You're right. Maybe he should have just chucked everything out and started again.
My view on Corbyn, and I did vote for him, is that I don't. And after seeing him not play the game, because he isn't playing the game.
No,
I think that he doesn't have any real ambition of being leader. I think it's a kind of cleansing the palate, creating a vacuum for someone to come in who is slightly to the right of him.
But with a party realigned to the left and realigned to leftist tradition. Callum, mate, come here a minute. I pray to God you're right. I pray to whatever God you believe in that you're right about this. But I do occasionally find myself wondering, do you think when he's shaving... Oh, no, that wouldn't work with Jeremy Corbyn. Do you think when he's brushing his teeth in the morning and he's looking in the bathroom mirror, he does actually dream of Downing Street?
I don't think so. I
really?
Think anyone that goes into that position, I don't think he wanted to be leader, to be honest. But he has 40 years of saying things that you can't be in power and have and say some of those positions. And
no, you can't, can you? You recognise that. This is my trouble. The people who this is going to sound awfully patronising, but I'm really frustrated by people who can't understand that. You cannot, as leader, behave like a rejectionist backbencher. That's what leadership means.
I do. I personally believe in his view of the world, but I think he's not playing the game, and he is the wrong person. He is the wrong person because he has this backlog of opinions that when changed by the mainstream media, when kind of tweaked and taken the nuance out of, they sound awful.
Yeah.
And he can't really defend some of the things he says in isolation.
And it's not a polar choice. It's not a binary choice. You don't have to buy in completely to playing the game according to the rules laid down by the media in the way that Alistair Campbell helped Tony Blair do. But equally, you can't stick your fingers in your ears and pretend they don't exist either. I can't get him on the phone for love nor money, and most mainstream broadcasters can't. How's he going to get his message out? And part of the reason for that is that he knows he will be ambushed by people asking stupid questions about the price of a bus ticket instead of the possibility of Britain going to war.
Well, I admit, this is something I might disagree with you on. I think maybe moving to the left of the mainstream media opinion is potentially impossible. Cameron's been able to shift it slowly to the right, but moving to the left, can that be done? Is Alistair Campbell and Tony Blair, did they understand this? I think if you play a Trojan horse game, say your positions are slightly more to the right than what they are, and then try and move to the left, essentially the reverse of what the Tories are doing now, possibly the only way of a left-wing ideology coming into power.
Watch this space. Should we talk about Syria next, just to make things a little bit calmer and less febrile? I think we probably should. Thank you, Callum. I'll just squeeze Lee in. I've got about a minute, Lee, if you could be quick in Brentwood.
Yeah, I'll be as quick as I can without you interrupting, if you may.
You'll be lucky.
No, I think you're being really unfair. I've never voted for Corbyn. I never voted for Labour, ever. And I don't think I ever will. But the reality is, he inherited a party that had been hijacked by the establishment, which was evidenced by the prospective candidates that stood against him. He won that in the first round, which is, quite an achievement.
Yes.
Leading from the front. He's leading with his principles. Whether you agree with them or not is immaterial. He set his stall out that Cameron did not make the case. I personally agree. I don't think Cameron did make the case. It was simple political rhetoric. Whether you believe it or not is obviously another issue. But he's leading from the front.
No, you see, I'm going to interrupt now, as promised. I think well, we'll find out in the next hour whether I agree with your analysis of what David Cameron stood up and said in the House of Commons yesterday. But you're with respect, you're making precisely the mistake I described at the outset. He is making sense and being principled and being consistent on the issue of bombing Syria. But he's not leading the Labour Party. You say he's leading from the front. Who's behind him? Apart from this army of converted. The choir is singing behind him. Everybody else doesn't recognise any tune at all.